This reading is from Jim Brewer's book, I'm Not High. But I've got a lot of crazy stories about life as a goat boy, a dad, and a spiritual warrior. If you see the cover here, he does still kind of look high. I'm going to start to where he's on Saturday Night Live and talking about how they set up the show every week. On page 155. Pitch meetings kicked the week off. It was our first real chance to meet with that week's host and find out what they were into. We'd all go into a giant room and sit around a table with Lorne and the guest host and toss out ideas for that week's show. It was a fun, loose process, but tough too, because you were just recovering from the last week's show and you didn't always know what this week's host was going to respond to. Anything could happen. Norm was known for fake pitches in those Monday meetings. He'd purposely pitch the worst stuff. Tom Hanks hosted one year, right around the time he'd won 2 straight Oscars. We were doing the pitch meeting and it was Norm's turn. He very energetically stammered to Tom, I got this great idea where you're the shit my pants guy. Like you just, shit your pants. But you don't know why. You're just like, yeah, I shit my pants. Tom, being super polite, gave an anticipatory half smile, waiting for Norm to elaborate. Norm continued, completely earnestly, and everywhere you go, you shit your pants. People stop and say, there's the guy who shits his pants. It's gonna be funny. Total silence. After a beat, Lorne just wrinkled his lips, raised his eyebrows, and said, next. Norm would never bring anything real into a pitch meeting. He had a steady gig, Weekend Update, and was the brightest star on the show at the time. He'd do these awkward, uncomfortable joke pitches only with really big guests, which made it even funnier. Rather than get uptight about not having anything coming out of the pitch meeting, I decided to change my attitude. Good things always happen to me when things look the worst. My folks moved to Florida. I overcame it and turned it into a positive. As a waiter, I never learned the elaborate drink class system at TGA Fridays. I quit and wound up with a bunch of free ice cream. My manager inked me to a bad contract. I still got on a TV show, met Tracy Morgan, and learned a lot of life lessons. My first network sitcom fell apart, but I got to work with and drive around LA with Dave Chappelle. So I came into work on Tuesday and just started winging it, trying to stay loose. Instead of walking around with fear, my goal was just to make people around 30 Rock laugh in their day-to-day existence. Never mind getting on air, I wanted to get back to just being funny for funny's sake. There was this hippie kid interning with the writing staff who was legitimately terrible at easy stuff like taking messages and remembering to give them to you. But he was funny, and I liked to stop and gab with him once in a while. So that Tuesday, with nothing much going on for me work-wise, I bumped into him in the writer's room and started doing Joe Pesci. What are you, eating lunch? I said, you call that a roast beef sandwich? What's the matter? What are you busting my balls for, kid? You got some knife? I went on like this for a few minutes, just riffing and trying to make him laugh. He loved it. How come you never tried this on the show? I don't know, I said. Pesci's gold, he said. You've got him down perfect. I could see the wheels start to turn in his head, thinking about where this could fit into the lineup. He snapped his fingers and said, you should really take this on to the update with Norm. Really? I said, how would that work? Well, he explained, Pesci has a movie coming out, 8 heads in a duffel bag, so you'd go on the update as Pesci to promote the movie and ask Norm if he's seen it yet. And Norm, of course, hasn't, and that makes you mad and you just go off in a rage. That's great, I said, laughing, and started pretending I was Pesci berating Norm. One of the head writers, Steve Coren, walked by, then he stopped and came back. "What the heck is so funny?" he asked and looked at me quizzically as a grin spread across his face. "Wait, are you doing Joe Pesci?" Out of all the writers on staff, Steve would end up being my biggest champion. He was a Queens guy from near where I grew up. He had long hair and looked like the kind of guy who'd be happier in the woods than in an office. He'd helped Molly with her Mary Catherine Gallagher character, later went on to write for Seinfeld and also wrote a bunch of movies. "Yeah," the intern said enthusiastically, "Breur does the most unbelievable Joe Pesci." I kept talking like Pesci, and the intern told him his weekend update idea. Steve smiled. "You guys got a few minutes?" he asked. "Of course," I said. I had nothing but time. "Come to my room," he said. "I've actually had an idea for a Pesci sketch for a long time." So we went to Steve's office and sat down. I hadn't planned on any of this. "I've always wanted to do Pesci as a talk show," Steve confessed. "Yeah," I agreed. "He could even have DeNiro as a sidekick." Steve agreed, "Sure. And other people he worked with would be guests. My idea is that in making a movie with them, Pesci got mad or felt wronged by them, built up a grudge, and he's going to handle it like Tommy from Goodfellas would." "Yeah," I said. The whole thing was building organically. He could have a baseball bat at his desk. And one by one, Steve said, nodding, he's going to have them on his show and settle the score by beating the crap out of them every single time. "Totally," I said. "He could do that with any big-name star. Whoever our host is that week, he'd have them on, get really impatient with them for trivial crap, and then beat them down." We worked Tuesday night and Wednesday morning, banging out the shell of a script. Steve had the idea stewing around in his head for a while, and I was fluent in all things Pesci, so it came together pretty fast. My stress disappeared, and I felt like I had a renewed purpose. At the same time, I was impressed with Steve's command over how his words and jokes would come to life on stage. No detail escaped him. He knew what it took to sell a character, even the most comically absurd ones. "Lock into Pesci completely and lose yourself," Steve said, bringing up specific scenes from Raging Bull and Goodfellas. "Remember how Tommy moves when he stuffs Billy Bats in the trunk?" he asked. "Get the body language down and stay in character no matter how over the top it seems, and Lauren will eat it up." We ran the basic concept of the sketch by Anthony Edwards. "I love it," he said. "Do you do any impressions?" I asked. "Who do you think Pesci should beat down?" Anthony groaned. "I really suck at impressions." Steve pondered this news for a second before a mischievous grin spread across his face. "Macaulay Culkin." "Yeah," I said. "Why not? Joe Pesci got his ass kicked in Home Alone." "You up for it?" Steve asked Anthony. "Don't worry about getting Culkin down. All you have to do is act like a little kid. In fact, let's make you an overgrown Culkin with too short pants." The key to the Pesci sketches was the impressions. The night Jim Carrey played Jimmy Stewart while Mark McKinney played Jim Carrey was surreal. The more twists, the better. We wrote Anthony as Macaulay Culkin into the sketch and brought it to the Wednesday read-through just to see what would happen. Often, some of the funniest stuff on the show wouldn't come together until late in the week. If there were any holes in the lineup and you had something funny, you always had a shot. Everyone gathered around a big table, a couple of sketches were read, and then Lauren looked at us and asked, "What do you got?" "Hey," I said, looking around the room, going right into my Pesci voice. "I'm Joe Pesci, and this is the Joe Pesci Show." Lauren started laughing immediately, rocking back and forth in his chair. People around the table were howling. We read through the script and Anthony loved it. It made the lineup. I'll never forget that feeling, knowing I had something locked, loaded, and going into the show. The biggest killing I'd seen on the show was Molly doing the hapless, crazy Catholic schoolgirl Mary Catherine Gallagher. I couldn't believe the roar of the live crowd while she was doing that sketch. After hearing that, I didn't want laughs. I wanted that sound. A huge, all-encompassing white noise. In the dress rehearsal that Saturday, the minute the sketch started and I said, "I'm Joe Pesci," I heard that noise and I knew my contract was saved, at least for the rest of the season. Shortly after the new year, Alec Baldwin hosted the show. He had a big, serious movie, The Juror, with Demi Moore, coming out in a couple of weeks. Even back then, I marveled at the guy's versatility. He could take on any role, usually with a heavy display of bravado and masculinity, and knock it out of the park. I also knew, as he consistently proves nowadays with 30 Rock, that he could be funny too, darkly funny, and poke fun at himself in the process. Because the first Joe Pesci Show crushed, Steve and I were feeling a little cocky. Walking around the studio, I was way looser. If I ever got canned and all people remembered of me was the Joe Pesci Show, I was cool with that. I'd killed on one of the legendary stages in American comedy, and no one could take that away from me. Steve and I knew that to do the sketch again and do it right, we had to have someone do a unique and great impression. Sketches get tired fast for many reasons, and doing them repeatedly just because they crushed once is a sure way to bore the hell out of people. Even most of the cast recognized that about their own sketches and would grumble to one another if Lauren or a guest host asked that a dead horse be trotted out to get beaten yet again. But having Alec Baldwin as a host brought a prime opportunity to put our best stuff on the table and let him go to town on it. The Joe Pesci Show, Steve and I figured, was no exception. Not only is he a superb actor, but Alec was one of the only SNL hosts besides Tom Hanks who was super approachable 100% of the time. Most were nice, undoubtedly, but those two guys just really got it. They dropped their ego and fame at the door and were game for whatever was going to be funny. From the minute he got there, Alec ingratiated himself to everyone, hanging out in the hallways, talking to both producers and custodians, or having a sandwich in the writer's room with whomever was around. He was happy to learn about you, your wife, your family, where you grew up, and when he said, "We should all go to dinner Thursday night," he actually meant it, and he'd include everybody. Early in the week in the writer's room, Steve and I were BSing over lunch and studying Alec, who was sitting nearby, gabbing with a couple producers. "Look at that mug," Steve said, nodding in Alec's direction. "You know what? He's DeNiro." "You're right," I said, smiling. "Think he'll do it?" "Let's find out." We waited until there was a lull in Alec's conversation and then slid our chairs closer to him. "Hey," Steve said. "So we did this Joe Pesci Show thing back in December?" "Yeah," Alec answered, breaking into a grin. "That was funny." "We want to try it again this week," I added. "Excellent," Alec said, "and we were hoping that you would play Robert De Niro," Steve said. The warmth left Alec's face quickly as he clammed up and gave us a terse answer. "Nah," he said with a shrug and a shake of his head. "I don't do impressions." Both Steve and I started laughing because what Alec had just done, whether he knew it or not, was a spot-on impression of De Niro. It was classic De Niro, tight-lipped, not very forthcoming. He favors using short, compact facial expressions more than words to communicate. "That's all you gotta do," Steve said, smiling. "You don't even have to speak. You're already hilarious." Once again, Alec said, "Nah, really, that's not my thing," in a very De Niro way. I couldn't play Bobby. I backhanded Steve on the arm. "Did you hear him say Bobby?" I turned to Alec. "You must know him," I said. "Only people who know him call him that." "Oh, sure," he said. "I see Bobby from time to time, at parties and events." "Well," I explained, "all you'd have to say is 2 lines. In the sketch, a guest would come out and say the most harmless thing, and it would get misinterpreted by Pesci. The guest would be clueless, but then De Niro would remind the guest, a la Raging Bull, that he too had heard some things, or that what the guest had said was a little bit offensive to Pesci, in the same way De Niro's character Jimmy said it in Goodfellas. Naturally, it would all lead to an epic beatdown by Pesci. 2 lines? Alec asked with a glint in his eye. "That's all?" I nodded yes. That got him encouraged enough to start making the famous De Niro mug where he tucks his chin in, doesn't say much, and almost looks like he's smiling. He started looking around the room, mugging in character, twisting his neck and trying it out. "See," Steve said, reassuring him, "that's perfect." "That's all you gotta do," I said. "You come sit next to me out there, and when the guest gets going and Pesci gets offended, and you just say, 'I heard some things,' and that will set Pesci off even more." Okay, Alex said, getting into it, but I gotta have a glass of scotch in my hand and a cigarette. He remained in DeNiro mode the rest of the day. The sketch started off with Pesci introducing his old friend DeNiro, Alec, who took a seat on the sofa. Then we brought out David Spade, who was playing Brad Pitt. There was a whole exchange where DeNiro, Alec, stood up from the couch to greet Brad David, and then he didn't know whether to sit or remain standing out of courtesy, and Brad David didn't really know what was going on, which infuriated DeNiro, Alec even more. What am I doing? DeNiro, Alec said impatiently, addressing Brad David. Am I up? Am I down? What's the deal here? Sit down already. Just sit down. The crowd was howling. Then shortly after Brad David sat down, Pesci, me, got all paranoid and freaked out that Brad David said something about him. Brad David said, "No, I didn't say anything." And then DeNiro, Alex said smugly, "I heard some things." And the whole place erupted and the beatdown ensued. Alec was brilliant. Over the next year, my standing on SNL solidified. Sure, there was turbulence, but I launched a second character, Goat Boy, that was just as popular as my Pesci. I was reunited with Tracy Morgan when he joined the cast, and we even shared an office. We teamed up to do Wong and Owens, cheesy retired 80s porn stars who were desperately trying to work straight jobs, but every situation would always drag them back to their more hardcore side. They came out of the typical conversations Tracy and I would have every day. "Can anybody actually retire from porn?" Tracy asked me one afternoon, kicking his feet up on the desk in the office we shared. "'Cause you can't do it forever. That's not a physical possibility." We pondered the idea, and pretty soon it became hilarious to us, and Wong and Owens were born. I thought it would make for a great movie, even though it was probably the most embarrassing sketch I ever did. I was never required to strip down to a thong for any other job. Anyways, with Pesci as a regular part of the rotation, I got to work with stars like John Goodman, Jim Carrey, and Kevin Spacey. They came to the show wanting to be in a Joe Pesci sketch. I felt pretty good, like I'd cracked the code. Lauren had private dinners on Tuesday nights where only certain cast members got invited, and if you got an invite, that's how you knew you were doing well. And eventually I would get those invites, usually when a guest host was feeling a bit uncomfortable and the producers wanted someone to lighten the mood at dinner. I was happy to oblige. In the late winter or early spring of 1997, an intern told me that both DeNiro's camp and Scorsese's camp wanted tapes of The Joe Pesci Show. That immediately ballooned my head. I was certain I was going to be in Goodfellas 2 or Taxi Driver 2. My dreams from when I was a kid were all coming true. I was now going to be in movies with Pesci and De Niro, just like I promised Phil all those years ago when we were kids. I'd be the one calling De Niro Bobby. The tapes went out and no one ever called. No one sent me any scripts. No letters on Scorsese's stationery ever arrived. But in early April, the head producer, Marcy Klein, came into my office. If anyone made sure SNL happened, it was her. Marcy was short, brunette, and tough, the daughter of Calvin. She'd been around the show for years, running things with a no-nonsense approach. She came in and shut the door quickly behind her, then stood in front of it. Trouble, I thought. "Joe Pesci is coming in next Thursday," she said, getting right to the point. I was flabbergasted and asked, "What are you talking about?" "You're going to meet with him. He and Robert De Niro want to make a cameo on the Joe Pesci Show next week. That's it. And if this leaks, you get fired. End of story." She walked out of my office, closed the door, and then poked her head back in and smiled. "Pretty amazing, huh?" I had over a week to agonize, freak out, and most important, keep it to myself. Dee was the only person I told. I was happy to show her that the long struggle was paying off. Now I was back to thinking I was going to be buddies with De Niro and Pesci. I couldn't wait to just connect on a regular guy basis with my two heroes. Steve Coren had left the show by then. He was writing for Seinfeld, but he was the master behind the Pesci Show, so we called him and he came back for a week to help write the script. He was more surprised than I was. De Niro didn't do television. Lauren told the rest of the cast and made it clear that this was not to be announced. So Thursday afternoon came. I was anxious that Pesci would be a no-show and the whole plan would come unglued. Then an intern rapped on my office door and told me that the man had arrived with 2 beautiful female assistants, his and DeNiro's, and wanted to sit down with me before rehearsing. I walked nervously to the green room and peeked in to see Pesci decked out in a full-on shark skin suit. He was wearing a gold pinky ring and he had an expensive pair of Italian sunglasses pushed up on his forehead. He was squinting underneath them, looking at pictures and posters from the show that were hanging on the wall. As I walked in, he pushed the sunglasses back down onto his face, turned to me and smiled. "So you're Joe Pesci," he said with a laugh. I was so freaked out I couldn't even say more than, "Hi." "Why don't you sit down over here with me?" He motioned nonchalantly toward 2 sofas positioned next to each other. I walked over and sat down with him, and he started murmuring stuff about going to dinner last week at restaurants I'd never been to, with people like Jack Nicholson and Bobby DeNiro. He was dropping names like crazy, I think to indicate how he'd usually be spending his time if he weren't so graciously hanging out with me. Then he stopped abruptly, looked me directly in the eyes, and with all seriousness said, "Well, you gonna thank me for giving you a career?" Before I could answer, he continued with a stern tone. "Listen, I like comedy, I really do. You like those cartoon guys, Beavis and Butthead?" "Yeah," I said. I was wondering when the punchline was coming. "Yeah, me too," he said, chuckling. "Freaking idiots! That's comedy." Then he paused before continuing on, his smile disappearing. "But whatever it is you're doing as me, that ain't comedy." I was stunned. He continued, "Let me ask you something." "Go ahead," I said, nodding. "Are you Italian?" he asked. By the look on his face and the tone of his voice, he already knew the answer was no. "No, sir." "Yeah," he said, "I figured as much. So tell me this. Where do you get balls big enough to use terms like guinea, wop, and dago?" "What? What do you mean?" "I always hear you, as me, using slurs like guinea, wop, and dago," and he said it, "and I never hear you disparaging other races. It always derogatory about Italians, and you're not even Italian. That bothers me." "Well," I explained, "I always consult with an Italian writer." "Frank Sebastiano?" he asked. Frank wrote for SNL for many years before he joined David Letterman. "Yeah, I know that guy. I talked to him, but here's the thing. You and I are performers, and you and I know that when we're on the screen, we're the ones liable for the racial slurs that come out of our mouths. So you are the one who's using these racial slurs. Am I right or wrong?" Yeah, I stammered. I felt like Spider from Goodfellas. He was attacking me perfectly and I had no comeback. The 2 assistant girls were across the room from us, both looking down at their shoes so intently you'd think they were made of gold. "No, yeah," I was sweating. "Where did you grow up anyway?" "On Long Island." I thought knowing we were from common grounds might calm him down. "I actually have a lot of friends that say they know you." "Oh yeah?" he said cynically. "Where on Long Island?" "Valley Stream." "Valley Stream?" he said, shaking his head. "I don't know no one from Valley Stream." He wasn't breaking character, so I just assumed he was a real deal mafioso there to shake me down. And now I was going to have to pay him a percentage for the rest of my career. I was sure he was going to say, "For the rest of your life, you owe me 10%. He was that serious. "You know, my grandfather came here and built Lower Manhattan," he said. "I'm just a simple family man, a non-violent guy, and now I gotta deal with someone like you? Someone who portrays me as a vicious animal that walks around places beating people? My family turns on the TV and sees you doing me as a violent person because of a character that I played in a film? That ain't Joe Pesci. You are doing a caricature of a character." I wanted to ask him something. If I was responsible for the slurs I was supposedly using on TV, wasn't he responsible for the violence during his movies? But I knew that would just make things worse. He knew I was spoofing, right? I loved the guy. This was all wrong. I never meant to offend you, I said meekly. You never meant to offend me? He asked in a tone that suggested he thought I was lying. He took his sunglasses off and placed them on his thigh. Then why would you use these ethnic slurs? And here's another thing. Don't thank me for showing up here. Thank Bobby. This is his idea. He's the one who watches the tapes of your show, laughing his ass off, telling me, we should go on that show and bust this guy's balls. That would be a laugh. So that's why I'm here. I didn't want to do this. I'm offended by it. And for the record, I don't think you sound anything like me, he spat. You make me sound like Mickey Mouse. I stood up, convinced the sketch was toast. Pesci just came to clear the air, freaked me out so bad I'd never embarrass him or demean his name again. I know you got upset when I said I didn't mean to offend you, Mr. Pesci, I said slowly and earnestly. To be honest, I really didn't mean to offend you. Ever since I was a little kid and I saw Raging Bull, I looked for you in anything I could find. Easy Money, I loved it. I followed your career. I wanted to be you. I imitate you out of admiration, not to be malicious. I was pacing the floor now like a lawyer making his closing statement. I will never do the sketch again, I said. That's the last thing I want to do is hurt your feelings. But I do need to defend myself on one point. It might be splitting hairs, but if you really listen to the sketch, I never insulted Italians. I always do you getting mad at someone and perhaps their prejudice, saying, what do you think? I'm some kind of crazy rigatoni? A spazzed out scongili? But I never called an Italian that. I always accused a person of those thoughts as I beat them with a baseball bat. And as I was saying that, Pesci's expression went from annoyed to annoyed with a little bit of sincere understanding in it. Then back to quietly annoyed. Yeah, he said, looking at me like I was a misguided chump. I know that. This has been a learning experience, I said proudly. The armpits of my shirt were now oceans. It's not worth it. I apologize. I think you're a phenomenal actor. We'll never do the sketch again. What? He said, spitting out the words, scooting forward in his chair, the volatile, impatient guy returning. What do you mean we're not going to do it? I already told Bobby we're going to do it. Of course we're going to do it. He wagged his finger back and forth between me and him. Jeez, I thought a guy from Long Island could take a little ball busting. I'm just playing games with you, Jimmy, busting your balls. Jeez. Okay, I said. I heaved a sigh of relief and still more than a little bewilderment. He toyed with me for 15 minutes. You're a funny guy, Pesci said, breaking into a smile and nodding his head. Now I was feeling better. I don't understand the goat thing, though. What's that all about? It weirds me out. Goat Boy had come to life that season, and it evoked strong reactions in people. It didn't bug me that he didn't get it. I was more than happy he didn't blow up the whole sketch and count me as an enemy. Still, I thought I'd at least explain. Well, he's supposed to be... Okay, never mind that, Pesci said, standing up and putting his sunglasses back on. I've got a car waiting for me downstairs. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna come back tomorrow to block this scene. So you'll tell me where to stand, where Bobby's gotta stand, and I'll let him know, cause Bobby don't do no rehearsing. And we ain't showing up for this whole dress rehearsal thing on Saturday. We show up for the real deal, and that's it. You got a problem with that? No, sir. He came back Friday and took over the set, entertaining everyone with stories from the movies he'd been in. And he was telling corny and dirty jokes trying to make me laugh, saying, Jimbo, ever hear this one? It was great. He was calling me Jimbo. But then on Saturday night, a half hour before dress rehearsal, the wheels flew off completely. DeNiro's not going to make it, Steve said. I was in hair and makeup getting my Pesci nose put on. I said, good one, Steve. No, he said, I'm not kidding you. Apparently he didn't know that Saturday Night Live is live. What? He doesn't do live television. That's how cool DeNiro was. For the 20 years the show had been on the air, he had no idea it was live. So now we had to ask ourselves, do we still do it? We'd heard nothing about Pesci bailing, so the producers asked Darrell Hammond to play a fake DeNiro alongside the real Pesci. It was going to be me, Colin Quinn as a fake DeNiro, the real Pesci as himself, and Darrell as a fake DeNiro. It made no sense. Steve Corn wasn't into it. I certainly wasn't into it. No one was into it. Steve and I argued with the producers that we should go just with the real Pesci and be insanely grateful for our good fortune. The dilemma lasted all the way up until the 8 p.m. dress rehearsal show. I took the stage, got behind my desk, and when 15 seconds was shouted and the studio quieted to a hush, I could see Darrell and a DeNiro get up waiting in the wings, but both the real Pesci and DeNiro were no-shows. I knew the sketch was going to be a debacle. Defeated, I went into it half-heartedly, not giving my all to my lines or to my character, and Pesci and DeNiro, real or fake, weren't due to come on stage until the very end, so I had to slug my way through the whole thing, with Rob Lowe impersonating Eric Roberts and Chris Kattan adeptly playing David Spade. The sketch ground its way out, and right at the end, I heard the loudest roar from a crowd I'd ever heard in my whole life. It was as if the Beatles were all alive and had decided to show up that night. I looked over to where Darrell was standing to see that the real Pesci and DeNiro had emerged from the wings and come on stage. DeNiro had a little hat on, and he was looking over at me with a sparkle in his eye, grinning his famous grin. I could not have been more surprised. They'd been nowhere near the stage, or maybe even the whole studio, until the very second they were supposed to walk on stage. And every time DeNiro opened his mouth, the crowd went wild. The big joke of the sketch was that after Pesci lectured me, much in the same way he lectured me in the green room, DeNiro busted Colin Quinn, wagging his finger, eyeballing his horrible orange suit, and asking bluntly, "Who are you supposed to be?" And Colin very matter-of-factly answered, "Colin Quinn, remote control," name-checking his old MTV game show. And once the dress sketch was over, they split and didn't return until they were due to appear on the broadcast show. By then, masses and masses of people had shown up because word got out that Pesci and DeNiro were on the show. Everyone's managers and agents and all the friends they could sneak in were milling around the hallway hoping for a chance to see the good fellas, even if only on the monitors. And just like that, the hallway noise died down and the crowd parted like the Red Sea as Pesci and DeNiro returned and made their way toward the studio. DeNiro nodded politely every few feet, asking, "How you doing?" to assorted hangers-on. Pesci spotted me and winked. "This is the big night, Jimmy," he said, squeezing my arm. "You ready? We're going to have fun. See you in a couple minutes." Then he and DeNiro went into their dressing room. The next time I saw them was during the live sketch. I got into makeup and wardrobe, and Lauren approached me much in the manner that Pesci did. "Big night," he said in his typical understated way. "You ready for it?" "Yes," I said. "Thanks a lot, Lauren. Thank you so much." "People are going to see this for a long time, Jim," he said matter-of-factly. Through all of our disagreements and misunderstandings, this was what I loved about Lauren. He always seemed to have a sense of how everything would play out. In one calm sentence, he subtly motivated me to focus, and he said it so simply and so assuredly that I really just paid attention to his words. He helped me make the moment, and it's one of the greatest moments, I'd wager, in the history of SNL. Over 13 years later, it still makes me immensely proud, and I still hear about it from fans. After the sketch, Pesci found me on my way to remove my prosthetic nose. "You never met Bobby, did you?" "No." "Well, he's dying to meet you." We went into his dressing room and I said, "Mr. DeNiro, thank you so much. I swear to God, that was unbelievable." No, he said, closing his eyes and nodding his head quickly. "You're good. You're very funny. Very funny." "Nah." "No," he said, and slapped me on the shoulder. "You're very funny." "Thanks," I said, and without any hesitation I added, "Can you sign my Raging Bull tape?" "Absolutely." So I went and grabbed the tape. DeNiro signed it, and the inscription read, To Jimmy Breur, a real good fella, Robert DeNiro. Maybe I should have read that last line as a real good fella, Robert De Niro. Sorry for my terrible accents.